As you continue to work on your labs project and prepare for graduation and the job search after, let's go through a refresher on the backbone of your resume and LinkedIn profile, power statements. As a reminder, power statements are how you reflect your past experience as well as your projects, and they help you stand out on your resume and your LinkedIn because they focus not just on what you did, but on the achievements and contributions that were wrapped up in that. Hopefully, this formula looks like a refresher for you. Power statements are made up of an action verb followed by quantifiers and qualifiers to describe how you did something, and should always include a result or an achievement associated with what you did. Quantifiers and qualifiers help describe how you did something, and they also give numbers and metrics to back up your results and your achievement baked into what you did. Another way to think about how to write a power statement is about what you did, how you did it, and why it mattered. So you don't want to just focus on what you did. That's a great start, but it's important for an employer to understand the process that went into how you approach that problem and the impact that it had or the final result. This is what helps you stand out on your resume and your LinkedIn profile because it allows a hiring manager to get inside your head a little bit and understand not just the skills that you have, but the practical application of those skills. As you think about reflecting both your project and your prior work experience, regardless of whether or not you've worked in tech before, all of your experience, project and work related, should be written with power statements. Let's look at an example of this in action and break down some power statements together. Here's Lillian's resume. She is a graduate from the web developer track. And as we can see in the lower left corner of her resume, her prior career experience was not in tech. She has some great experience here, but the majority of her resume, over half of it, is dedicated to her project experience. If you don't have prior work experience in the tech field, your resume should look a lot like this, with half or even more of the page dedicated to your projects. If you have prior tech experience, then you want your work experience to take up maybe a little bit more of the page. And depending on if you've worked as a developer, a data scientist, or how closely you've worked to the field that you're pursuing with Lambda School, you might want to switch the balance a little bit so that more of your resume is taken up by your work experience. But career changers, you don't need to worry so much about having all of your work experience on your resume. It needs to only be one page. And for most of you, your projects are going to be your most directly transferable work experience. So that's really what we want to highlight. We can also see that Lillian's skills are at the top of her resume where they're really easy to find. This is one of the first things that recruiters and hiring managers are looking for. They want to be able to skim your resume quickly and easily in order to look for the skills that they're hiring for. So you want your skills to be easy to find on your resume, and you want your projects to be easy to find on your resume as well. So let's go into some examples of Lillian's power statements here and break them down. So looking at this first one from her Sanctions Explorer project, one example of a power statement is validated code changes with mock server requests using Jest to increase unit and functional test coverage. Remember, power statements are made up of action verbs, quantifiers and qualifiers, and achievements or results. So let's break this power statement up into those components. First, in green, we have a strong action verb that's starting the power statement, validated. Since this is something that Lillian did in the past, it's in the past tense. If it was a project that she was actively working on at the time of writing her resume, then she would want to write validate. Something to avoid is verbs ending in ing or the present participle. You want it to either be validate or validated. You don't want to have verbs like validating on your resume. It's just one of those nitpicky resume rules, and it makes your resume look cleaner to stick to present or past tense. So validated is a strong action verb, and it starts the power statement out with a bang. It grabs your attention. And if you scan through Lillian's resume, you notice that she doesn't reuse the same verbs over and over again, which is a good thing to do just to add some more interest to your resume so that it doesn't sound repetitive. Next, we see here that she has some qualifiers where she describes how she did things. So she validated code changes with mock server requests using Jest. Mock server requests using Jest qualify how she validated code changes. It describes how she did something. And then at the end here, we see to increase unit and functional test coverage. That's the impact that Lillian's work had in this power statement. If we were to look at this in a different way, she could have just written validated code changes to increase unit and functional test coverage. But then we're missing some of that valuable information about how she did it. Similarly, she could just leave it at validated code changes and have nothing else, but that would have even less information. By adding in more about how she did something and the impact that it has, we have a much better sense of the scope of what Lillian did and why it mattered for the project. And this could help a hiring manager look at this experience and see it in the context of what their team is working on currently. Let's look at another example. Contributed to a remote team of front-end developers by building RESTful APIs to power a full stack application. Similarly to the first one, we have a clear action verb, contributed, starting out the power statement. She qualifies the work that she did by mentioning that she was on a remote team of front-end developers. So we know that she was working remotely, not in person, which tells us valuable information about her collaboration skills and how she can collaborate. And she mentions front-end developers specifically. So we know that she has experience working with other front-end developers as a full stack web developer herself. And she mentions building RESTful APIs. So we know how she contributed to this specific team because she mentions by building RESTful APIs specifically. And then the impact here is to power a full stack application. That's the result of her collaboration, the contributions that she made to this remote team. Again, we could leave out a lot of this information and just say contributed to a remote team by building RESTful APIs and leaving it at that. That would still make sense, but it would lack some important information that helps us understand how she's worked with people, the types of things she's done, and the impact that she had. So these are both technical bullets from her past projects, but what about her prior work experience? Lillian does a really great job of highlighting her transferable skills from her time as a patient care coordinator. This is not super directly relevant to tech, but there's a lot of really valuable experience that she got from working there, and she does a really good job of highlighting it. So let's look at an example of a power statement from her past work. Standardized documentation for care coordination as a member of an internal process improvement committee so as to refine workflows and improve protocols to track action items. Even though this wasn't a technical role, we still see the same structure and thoroughness in this power statement as we can see in her project power statements. So let's break it down. Standardized, we're starting out with a strong action verb. It's clear, it's in the past tense. She mentions being part of an internal process improvement committee. So we can assume how she worked with people based off of this. We know that she was collaborating with a committee of people, so probably folks that represented different backgrounds and interests and focused on process improvement specifically. And so because she's done this in the healthcare field, even though it wasn't in a technical environment, we get a sense that she understands how to look at processes and improve them in a way that could probably be transferable to a technical role. So we're highlighting really valuable transferable skills here. And then she still focuses in on an impact by specifying that this allowed the team to refine workflows and improve protocols to track action items. So again, even though this is not a technical experience and it might seem even kind of unrelated to her career goals as a developer, she still does a really good job of picking out important information that highlights her transferable skills and why she was a contributing member to that team in a way that would help a technical hiring manager see those transferable skills and maybe even start to apply it to their own team while they're reviewing their resume. Lillian used the space on her resume really well. There's not a lot of wasted space. If you were to see this on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, most of the space would be taken up without looking too cramped or too busy. As you're thinking about reflecting your past experience, try to include a comparable level to detail. It won't always be possible, and sometimes you might need to add in some more information, and a lot of times you're going to end up having to take information out to keep it all on one page. But when you're thinking about how to reflect your project experience and your work experience, think about ways that you can add that detail in and add qualifiers and quantifiers and talk about the impact that you had. That way people start to get a really good sense, not just of what your skills are, but how you've applied those skills to different environments. And when it comes to polishing your resume and your LinkedIn, I want to give a note on proofreading. I'm going to show a snippet in Python, and I want you to take a moment to look at it. What would happen if you were to run this line of code in Python? I'll give you about 15, 30 seconds to review it. So hopefully that was enough time for you to realize that if you were to run this, you would get a syntax error. And if you look here, we're missing an apostrophe after hello. What this should look like is this example on the right. So, when you're thinking about the skills that it takes to be a successful data scientist or web developer, having a strong attention to detail matters because small little typos like this one here can have big impacts on the functionality of your code or the work that you're doing. You need to have a strong attention to detail. That is an absolutely critical skill for both web developers and data scientists. And part of your job will be avoiding and correcting these small errors. So if someone's looking at your resume and they're seeing similar small typos that don't make your resume less readable, you can still understand what it's saying, but if it's missing those small details and it has those small typos in it, what might a hiring manager think when they're looking at your resume? Or what assumptions might they make about your attention to detail, which is likely going to be a critical skill that they're scanning for in applications? So, when you're proofreading your resume and your LinkedIn profile, remember that it matters. It matters more than just having a grammatically accurate resume in LinkedIn. It matters because it's a reflection of the attention to detail that you'll also bring to your job. And that's something that a lot of hiring managers are considering when they're reviewing your resume. So take the time to proofread it. Have a friend who has a really good eye for detail review it. Have a member of your family who has good attention to detail review it. Get input from other people. Read it backwards. Read it out loud to yourself, not just in your head. And make sure that you are using a spell checker or Grammarly or something when writing your resume to catch those really easily prevented typos. When you're writing your power statements, you want to keep them concise. And one way to do that is through disembodied first person or first person implied. So, first person means that you're writing from your own perspective using statements like I did, or I coordinated, or I developed, etc. An example of what this could look like is I coordinated all our team syncs to ensure we were on the same page about tasks and responsibilities. This makes sense. There's nothing wrong with this statement. But on resumes, we use disembodied first person to keep things a little bit more concise. When you're writing your resume, the person reading it is going to know that you're talking about yourself. So you don't really need to say I, we, and our. Instead, what this could look like is coordinated all team syncs to ensure continuity and dissemination of tasks and responsibilities. It says the exact same thing as the first statement. It's just written a little bit more in quote resume speak, and it's a bit more concise and direct, and the language sounds a little bit more impactful as a result. So now that we've gone through how to frame your experience on your resume and on your LinkedIn through power statements, I want to briefly go through how you can add your projects to your LinkedIn because it's a little bit weird and it's not super intuitive if you haven't used LinkedIn a lot. To add projects to your LinkedIn, you're going to need to add a project section to your LinkedIn profile. For most of you, you'll have to manually add this section unless you've added it before for some other reason. So when you go to your LinkedIn profile, you'll see right at the top of your page where it has your location, your connections, contact info, right at the top of your page, you'll see this tab for add profile section. If you expand this, you'll see a whole list of things that you can add. And we definitely encourage you to explore what else is in this list to make sure that it is thorough and representative of all of your skills and backgrounds. But the thing we're going to be looking for is under accomplishments and projects. So if you click projects, it will pop up with this screen and you'll be able to enter your project details here. And what this looks like when it's done is it'll pop up on your LinkedIn profile towards the bottom of the page, and it will look like this. A quick note, when you're adding links to your projects, make sure that you are linking to the GitHub link. You should only link to the repo. We recommend not linking to deployed project links unless you own the URL and are going to be actively maintaining it. In case it gets taken down or someone else buys it or it ends up going to a different purpose in the future. Linking to the repo is always safest. And of course, if you have a website that you are going to be maintaining, feel free to link to that instead. We'll share some strong examples of resumes and LinkedIn profiles with this video to help guide you as you're working on these items. And you should also use the resume and LinkedIn checklist to help you get your materials ready for the job search. These checklists were made specifically based on hiring manager feedback. And if you follow them, your job application materials should be in a really strong spot to be reviewed by a member of the careers team.